Hi, Dr. Raleigh, how are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on.
Good, I'm happy to have you. Um, so you also have a book called Exponential Living. Stop spending 100% of your time on 10% of who you are. So
Yes.
COVID-19 is going to be with us for years. Can you talk about, how we can sort of handle that stress now, but what we can sort of plan for the future, to really find out who we are and focus on that.
Yeah, so the core definition of exponential living is pursue peace, choose clarity, and live courageously. And when I say pursue peace, is because it is absolutely a daily and honestly in unprecedented times like this, it is a moment by moment conscious decision. As Dr. Ayana said, it may be through 5 minutes of just let me slow myself down. There's other practices that we can employ. If you're a person of faith, it may be uh, Bible verses or maybe mantras. But the most important key to the pursuing peace is that understanding peace is not something that's given to you or taken away from you because it's never external. Peace is an internal commitment and decision that you have to consistently make to yourself, that regardless of what's going on around you, I make the decision on whatever those practices are that I use to stay in my place of peace. Because when we get to that place of peace, there's always clarity. When you get peace, it gives you the clarity. And when you have that clarity, when you bring peace and clarity together, it gives you the courage to make any decisions. If that decision is, I need to take this time and really focus on how do I build, or I take this time and focus on how do I get still, or if you're in that place of survival, where you are absolutely the critical component of taking care of your parents and your children. You're responsible for homework and laundry, and your spouse wants to make love, right? These are all real responsibilities. And you're the anchor to all of that. Well, you have to have the courage to then make the decisions that you don't get lost in the midst of that. So, exponential living, especially in these unprecedented times, is about that consistent commitment to pursuing peace, choosing clarity, and living courageously to make those core decisions that are going to not only anchor you, but then benefit everything that you're involved with.
Okay. Thank you. As you were talking, I sort of went to the thought that a lot of us have ideas of things that we want to do, some passions we want to explore, music, painting, whatever it is. And we have those things that kind of, that voice that says, oh, you really want to do this. But we don't, because we have responsibilities, or we think maybe it's not realistic to try to pursue those dreams. Sounds like with exponential living, you're saying give yourself permission to explore those dreams. Don't necessarily think of them as, sort of too pie in the sky. So, sort of given where we are now, what would you say to people who are thinking, well, maybe I need to really consider acting on my dreams?
One of the things that my husband and I talked about probably in week 3 of the quarantine was, I mean, we were grieving for the loss of lives, including my cousin, who is one of the closest people to me. When we were really grieving the struggle that a lot of people are in financially. But we also recognize that this opportunity right now was to really leverage what we all said we needed more of, and that is time, right? The commute is now done. We don't have to take our children to all these extracurricular activities. And so the most valuable asset that we were all saying we needed, right, is now time. Now, here's the struggle that we've all met in this place of time. What do we do with it? And where I think we're all trying to find the one answer, right? But the reality is some of us are going to use this time to build. You're going to write that book. You're going to start that business. You're going to use this time to build. But then there's others that they're going to use this time to be still. I mean, they've been going, going, going. And the reality is they need to stop, reflect, get organized, take some downtime. And then there's others that are in survival mode. I mean, like I said, you're taking care of parents, you're taking care of children, you're doing homework, you're working remotely, financially, you're struggling, and you're in survival. And the reality is no one person can give you all the answers. So the best thing we can do to really own our peace in this time of quarantine and in this unprecedented time is not be so focused on what other people are saying. The most important voice that we need to listen to is, what are you saying to yourself?
Mm.
What is the conversation you're having in your head? Are you speaking negatively about yourself? Are you waking up and looking at all the struggles and the challenges? Or are you waking up saying, I'm blessed to have this roof over my head. I'm blessed to have these children that I got to go do homework with. You know, what's the conversation in your head? And then when we make that commitment to what is most important to us, then it's like you said, and what I said earlier, then we have to give ourselves permission. We got to give ourselves permission to give ourselves grace. You know what? The laundry is not going to get done today. We got to give ourselves permission to own what's most important for us. And we got to give ourselves permission to create these boundaries. And the most important thing is, when you give yourself permission and you take ownership of what's most important to you. Are you building? Do you need to be still? Are you in survival mode? Then you can really tune into the help that you need. That help may be a therapist. That help may be a life strategist like myself. That help may be a webinar or a podcast. But everyone's voice is not the voice that's going to resonate with you. So if you're building, the voice that says be still, that's not who you listen to. If it's time for you to be still, you shouldn't even pay attention to the person that's like, go, 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 because that's not the voice that you need to listen to. But it starts with taking ownership first of what's most important to you.
And it also sounds like trust yourself and
Yes.
listen to that voice. Yeah.
And that's where that confidence comes. When you have peace, clarity, and courage, it is so equal to confidence. And here's the thing that I say, Linda, is that especially as Black women, we are driven. We are some of the most driven human beings in the world. But the area of growth that we need to focus on is our confidence. And drive and confidence are not equal. Drive is what gets you to that level of achievement. Confidence is who you are when you get there. And so as Black women, it's so important for us to be just as committed to our confidence and what it means and how we get there, and understand that drive and confidence are not synonymous.
Yeah. We can get very focused on the struggle and not focus on what that actually means for us.
Yes.
Well, thank you. So stay there. I want to bring on our other panelists, Dr. Foster and Dr. Abrams. I'm going to ask a question while we're bringing them on, because, you know, you've in the book, I think it might be easy for a listener to say, well, sure, if you have this kind of a job, if you have this, if you have that, you can live live life exponentially. But what would you say to the woman who still has to go to work? She has, like so many of us, she has to put herself on the front line. She's got to maybe to get on the subway in New York and go to work, be faced with members of the public who are not wearing masks, perhaps, has children at home. She's got to deal with all of that. What would you say to her about about trying to get that confidence?
When I started the process of transitioning from owning a consulting firm into the space of serving as a life strategist, the principles of this book, Linda, were birthed when I was homeless. My youngest daughter and I lived with my dear friend in her spare bedroom and in hotels. My husband and our oldest daughter lived with my in-laws. I lost my father. My business completely went under in the phase of what it was, transitioning into this next level of service. And so when I birthed these principles, it wasn't from the highest levels of success. It was from the lowest, darkest place in my life. And these principles were birthed out of my own survival. They were birthed out of, Sherry, you got to live in your power. You got to pursue peace and a positive mind. You got to have the courage to be faithful, which means healing. And so I say these principles were birthed out of the reality of what a frontline worker is dealing with now, what a person who literally has lost their job or furloughed. Because again, what I learned is these principles apply if you're in your lowest, deepest, darkest pain, or if you're at the highest level of success, like Shanita referenced, and she was in that place of depression and brokenness, the principles apply because they serve us at our deepest rooted place of peace, clarity, and courage in any reality and circumstance.
Wow.
So I so relate because it was birthed
Yeah.
out of my deepest broken pain. And it's what allowed me to endure through to get to that place of really making the decisions on how I protect myself and my family.
Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you. So, Dr. Ayana, I've got a question here. Where can people find counselors in therapy? I mean, and I think we're probably talking specifically Black women, but, and are there some specific resources that you recommend? And another related question, and maybe both of you can even answer this. If you live alone, how can you cope without being able to see members of your family? So, Dr. Ayana, if you take the first one about resources.
Sure. There are lots of online resources to find therapists. So the two that I always recommend is Psychology Today. It's a huge directory of therapists, and you can type in your zip code. You can filter it by insurance. You can filter it by provider. You can filter it by location. All these different ways in which you can get a list that's more curated and tailored for your needs. And I'd also recommend Therapy for Black Girls, who is by local psychologist, Dr. Joy Harden Bradford. And that's a great resource to find Black clinicians and Black women clinicians who you're looking for. Another resource I'd recommend for people who we love in our lives, any men who we love in our lives, is therapyforblackmen.org. So another reference that is for us and by us that has culturally sensitive therapists there.
Okay. And the question about coping without being able to see, or coping with not being able to see your family.
Yeah, I think that isolation and that grieving has been really difficult for us, right? A lot of times we're talking about quarantining with people and how we're navigating that versus when it's me in this space, how do I take the best care of myself? And I always say, stay connected, right? That is the time in which you do your best to reach out and allow people to reach in to you, right? That even though we cannot touch and see people in the way in which we're used to, we can still have a sense of connection to people by seeing familiar faces, by hearing familiar voices. That's also really helpful for us and can be really soothing for us when we're in distress, just having that familiarity.
Yeah. Dr. Sherry?
Yes, and I would just add to that, I totally agree. It's also two things. Be very intentional about laughter. Just intentional, whether it's making sure that you find those books that you love that are funny, those movies that you love or that are funny, that friend that you know is always funny, FaceTime them. But also be intentional about periodically switching up your routine, right? So if how can you make adjustments throughout your day and change that routine? Because a lot of times, and I am actually working with clients, companies are asking me to work with their employees that are isolated because they're seeing just how this is having an effect on them. And the most effective things that we've done is breaking up their routine because they have gotten into this rut of just, this is what I do every day, this is what I do. So breaking up that routine and making sure you're intentional about what laughter is for you. And then lastly, being able to just find, one of my clients literally made a journey out of going to the mailbox. I so encourage those individuals that are isolated, use that creativity to create outside of your routine ways that activate that child in you, that activate that joy in you when you were just young and silly and funny, because the anxiety and pressure of what we're living in is heavy enough. So be intentional about what's that funny, crazy, silly, stupid thing that you as a 45-year-old Black woman can still do and just have a good laugh at yourself and with someone else that you FaceTime with and share it with them.
Well, I can attest to laughter. I have an 11-month-old grandson, and so his parents, he's in New Jersey, his parents send videos, and it doesn't really matter what he's doing. If I need a break, if I need to laugh, that's the purpose. Is I look at his videos, I look at his pictures, and then I'm good for the next few hours until the next time I need to look at him. So, Dr. Sherry, one more question.
And you go back to that movie. I was going to say, go back to that movie that you watched as a youth that you can find on Netflix or somewhere.
Mhm.
That was when you were 15 years old that just made you crack up.
How do you communicate your need for help to family and friends? I mean, we talk about how important it is to ask for help, but it's not always easy to ask for help.
Yeah. And it goes back to giving yourself permission. And it goes back to that drive versus confidence. Drive will make you believe I'm invincible, I'm superwoman, right? I can do this. But confidence allows you to walk in the truth of who you are and makes you understand asking for help doesn't minimize who you are. It doesn't minimize the impact that you bring into the world. And it definitely doesn't make people look negatively at you. And so when you give yourself permission, and here's the key word, to be vulnerable. When you give yourself permission to be vulnerable, as Black women, we look at that word as such a negative reality. But the truth is, our strength is in our vulnerability. I'll share this quickly. A friend of mine who actually had COVID, she was in the hospital for 4 years. She sent me a text last night that said her weakest moment was when she admitted that she was ready to give up because the pain was so bad. But she woke up the next day and her body started to heal. And I'm a woman of faith. I don't put my faith on anyone. But the text I sent her back was, that wasn't a moment of vulnerability. That was when you a moment of weakness. That was when you gave yourself permission to be vulnerable. And that's when the grace of God was able to meet you at your request. And that's exactly what happens when we ask our friends and families for help, is that area of vulnerability allows people to go, oh, that's where I can help her. Because a lot of times people want to help us, but we're so strong, they don't know how.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking about, to the earlier point, women who've lost their jobs, women who still have to go to work, and potentially put themselves in harm's way. I mean, how they are certainly feeling vulnerable, I would think. But what would you say to them to help them through, sort of make sense of all of this?
Is that for Dr. Ayana?
For both of you, yes.
Oh, what would help them? And that's honestly the biggest struggle I have with everything right now, is that people have to choose between a living and living, right? People are having to choose between a living and living. And the reality is there are single parents, there are individuals that they have to go back to work. And they are putting themselves at risk, but it's a reality that they have to face. So the natural things that we know, follow the social distancing and the mask. I mean, those things we know. I want to speak more to the psychological. And that is, don't beat yourself up. Don't beat yourself up. And really speak words of encouragement. In these places where it is an absolute necessity, our attitude is critical. Because if you face every day with the attitude of defeat and beat yourself up because of where you are, you're going to continue to add to the weight of the reality. So the reality is you have to go to work. The reality is that you are in this position. The truth is you still have the power to protect yourself. You still have the power to love yourself in this truth. You still have the power to make sure that you are the best you in this reality. And so that's why I would encourage people is be able to separate the reality of what you have to do with the truth of who you are, and not allow your own internal voice to beat you down and defeat you, so that you have the power to go out and be your best self in these absolutely trying times.
Yeah. Dr. Ayana?
To add to that, that's where, a lot of self-compassion, right, is really, really important for us during this time. And being able to allow yourself to acknowledge that this is hard. This is scary, that I don't have to do this with this brave face and just, push through when nobody knows what's going on. So kind of tapping back into that vulnerability that says allowing yourself to feel scared, right? Allowing yourself to feel angry that I even have to make this decision, right? To put myself at risk in these ways, allowing yourself to really acknowledge that these are normal and common feelings. And I also get to feel these things, that these feelings aren't just for other people, right? So Black women being able to kind of incorporate that and say, I get to have these feelings all day, every day, because this is what comes with this particular territory, and allowing our bodies kind of just room to feel that and to honor that we get to do that, right? And then also to allow ourselves to have some grieving around that, right? That I'm grieving that I don't get to make a different decision for myself, right? I feel envy in these spaces, right? When we're able to be more honest with ourselves, that's how we can really attach to a support system that allows us to be in that space. But not telling ourselves that I don't get to feel this way because it's not going to help me, versus allowing your body to have these very, very normal reactions to crisis, that this is a crisis that we're in.
And it sounds like if ever there's a time to practice self-care, and even if that self-care is to just give yourself that grace, just to say, it's okay, I have these feelings, they're mine, but it's okay to have them. This is the time.
This is the time. This is the time.
Yeah. Well, ladies, thank you very much. I want to thank you, Dr. Ayanna Abrams, Dr. Sherry Riley, Dr. Shanita Foster. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your day with all of us to talk about emotional health, to talk about mental illness, to talk about giving ourselves grace and being who we really are. We really appreciate it. Please be safe. Please be well. And we look forward to the next conversation.